The day before my son's wedding, his fiancée whispered in my ear, "Starting tomorrow, you're no longer a part of this family. You're not welcome anymore." Something inside of me shattered. I decided to stay home, devastated. What I didn't know was that, hours later, their wedding would completely fall apart for a reason nobody saw coming. But before I continue, make sure you're already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love to know how far our stories travel. Starting tomorrow, you're just ancient history to this family. That's exactly what my son's fiancée whispered to me on the eve of their wedding, while the other guests chatted brightly in the background. Her smile never faltered for a second, but her eyes were as cold as ice. I stood there, frozen. The gift I had brought, a scrapbook I'd spent months putting together, dangled from my trembling hands like a dead weight. In that moment, something inside of me broke. After 2 decades of raising my son, Ethan, all by myself, making every kind of sacrifice imaginable, this woman was telling me, with all the calmness in the world, that I no longer had a place in his life. My name is Carol, and for 25 years, I was both mother and father to Ethan. When my husband left us, Ethan was just 5 years old, still clutching that stuffed dinosaur he wouldn't let go of, even to sleep. I remember that first night alone, when he asked me with those enormous eyes, "Mom, when is Dad coming back?" And I, swallowing my tears, just smiled and said that sometimes people need to follow different paths. From then on, it was years of waking up at 5 in the morning to get him ready for school before rushing to my first shift at the medical clinic where I worked as a receptionist. Then I'd go to my second job at a department store until late in the evening. Many times, I'd come home so exhausted I could barely take off my shoes before falling asleep. But I always saved enough energy to listen to how his day went, to help him with his homework, to be his personal cheerleader at his high school soccer games. I saved every possible penny. I gave up new clothes, cut my own hair, sold the car to help pay for college tuition when the scholarships weren't enough. When Ethan graduated from law school, I felt like I had fulfilled the silent promise I made to that scared little boy. He would have every possible opportunity, no matter what I had to sacrifice. So, when he introduced me to Veronica 3 years ago, I really tried to like her. She was beautiful, sophisticated, and well-spoken, everything I never was. She worked at a well-known ad agency and was always impeccably dressed. Ethan seemed enchanted. His eyes lit up whenever she walked into the room. And I just wanted to see him happy. But there was something about Veronica that unsettled me from the start. The way her smile would vanish the moment Ethan turned his back. How she spoke to me with that condescending tone, as if she were doing me a huge favor just by addressing me. At family gatherings, she monopolized the conversation, talking about international trips and famous clients, rarely showing any interest in my life or in stories from Ethan's childhood. "Oh, how sweet," she'd say whenever I mentioned something from the past, as if she were talking to a child. On Ethan's 30th birthday, I baked the chocolate raspberry cake I had made for him every year since he was 12. It was our tradition. When I arrived at the party with it, Veronica took the plate from my hands with a tight smile. "Ethan is on a low-carb diet now, Carol, but thank you for the effort." The cake sat untouched in the kitchen while Ethan, unknowingly, ate the gourmet hors d'oeuvre she had catered. I swallowed my wounded pride, as I always did. That's just her way, I thought. She comes from a different world. She doesn't understand our simple traditions. And deep down, I hoped that with time, we'd grow closer, that she'd see me as family. The engagement came quickly, barely a year after they started dating. Ethan was beaming when he told me he had proposed during a sophisticated dinner at a waterfront restaurant. I forced a smile and hugged him tight, telling him how happy I was for him, all while fighting a sense of loss I couldn't explain. The wedding preparations excluded me completely. I wasn't called for menu tastings, cake selections, visits to florists, or any other decisions. When I subtly asked if I could help, Veronica replied, "Don't you worry about a thing, Carol. We've hired the best professionals. You just need to show up looking nice on the day." End of quote. And that's how it was until the eve of the wedding, when I decided to make one last effort to build a bridge. I prepared a scrapbook filled with photos and memories of Ethan's life, from his first steps to his law school graduation. Each page told a story of love and perseverance. each photo carefully chosen to show the wonderful man my son had become. I arrived at the rehearsal dinner, with the scrapbook wrapped in silver gift paper. Veronica intercepted me at the entrance, her white rehearsal dress shimmering under the soft lights. "Carol," she said with a shallow smile, "you came?" "Of course I came," I replied, extending the package. "I made this for you too. I thought maybe you could look at it together tonight, before the big day." It was then that she leaned in, her expensive perfume invading my space, and whispered those words that would brand me forever. "Starting tomorrow, you're just ancient history to this family. You've done your part, you raised Ethan. Now he's my husband, my family, and you? You're just extra baggage. Don't embarrass us by clinging to him." I stood there, frozen, in disbelief. Before I could respond, she continued, "In fact, maybe it's best if you don't even show up tomorrow. You'll save us the drama, Carol. It's not like anyone is really expecting you to be there. I don't remember how I got out of there. I don't remember driving home. I only remember sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the deep teal dress I had bought especially for the wedding, as silent tears streamed down my face. That night, I made a decision I never thought I'd make. For the first time in Ethan's life, I wouldn't be there for him. I would not show up at the wedding. And that decision, which felt like my final surrender, would end up being the catalyst for a devastating truth that no one was prepared to face. The morning of the wedding dawned with a clear, blue sky, the kind of perfect day every bride dreams of for her big moment. I woke up before my alarm, years of early morning routine etched into my body like an internal clock. For a moment, I moved on autopilot. I made coffee, took the dress off its hanger, set aside the simple but elegant shoes I had bought specially for the occasion, the kind a proud mother would wear to her son's wedding. Then, Veronica's words hit me again like a punch to the gut. "You're just extra baggage." I sat at the kitchen table, my hands trembling around my coffee mug, as the morning sun drew patterns on the tile floor I had installed myself years ago when I couldn't afford to hire a professional. My cell phone began to vibrate incessantly, texts from family and friends, all on their way to the church, all asking where I was. I ignored every single one. After an hour, the first call from Ethan came through. I let it go to voicemail, unable to hear his voice without breaking down. His message sounded worried, confused. "Mom, where are you? We're all waiting for you. Please, call me." It was the first time in 25 years I had deliberately let him down. The pain was almost physical, as if I were tearing something vital inside of me. But Veronica's words had opened a wound I had been ignoring for too long. For years, I had put Ethan's needs before my own, stifled my feelings, swallowed veiled insults and condescending treatment, all in the name of love for my son. But that morning, something different stirred within me. A voice that said, "You deserve respect too. You deserve dignity too." For the first time, I was choosing myself over my son. At 10 in the morning, the doorbell rang. It was my sister, Susan, still dressed for the wedding, her face a mixture of concern and irritation. "Carol, what the hell are you doing? Everyone is looking for you. The ceremony starts in an hour." I motioned for her to come in, unable to speak without tears escaping. We sat in the living room, the deep teal dress still hanging on the closet door like a ghost of what should have been. "I'm not going," I finally managed to say. Susan looked at me as if I had just announced I was moving to Mars. "What do you mean you're not going? It's your only son's wedding." "Andu. Veronica told me that after the wedding, I'm no longer part of their family. She told me not to even show up today." My sister's face went pale, outrage replacing the confusion. "She said that? She looked you in the eye and said that?" I nodded, the tears finally winning the battle against my self-control. "She said I'm extra baggage, that I've done my part, and now I need to exit the stage." Susan sat down heavily beside me, taking my hands in hers. For a long moment, only the ticking of the wall clock broke the silence. "Oh, Carol," she finally whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I always knew there was something wrong with that girl. She loves him, in her own way." I tried to defend, a final spark of hope for Ethan's future. "No." Susan shook her head firmly. "Love doesn't treat people like that. Love doesn't exclude. Love doesn't humiliate." As we talked, my phone continued to buzz with messages and calls. "Ethan, growing more desperate. Confused friends. Veronica's family curiously, completely silent. At 11 o'clock, the church bells began to ring in the distance. I pictured the guests taking their seats, Ethan nervous at the altar, Veronica getting ready in some side room of the church, probably pleased with my absence. This was supposed to be the beginning of the end of my story as a central part of Ethan's life. A step into the shadows, into the role of a distant figure to be tolerated on holidays and birthdays, always kept at arm's length. But fate had other plans. Shortly after noon, when the bells should have been announcing the union of the new couple, my cell phone rang again. It was Susan, who had reluctantly gone back to the church at my request. Her voice was trembling so much I could barely understand her words. "Carol," she whispered, as if afraid of being overheard. "The wedding didn't happen." My heart stopped. "What do you mean it didn't happen?" "Ethan found out." "God, Carol, it's so awful." He found out everything about Veronica moments before the ceremony. The floor seemed to disappear from under me. He found out that she was cheating on him, with her boss, for months. And there's more, so much more. Her family is bankrupt, Carol. They needed Ethan's money to save themselves. The prenup she insisted on? It was a trap to funnel his future earnings into her family's accounts. The world spun around me as the pieces clicked into place. The occasional comments about Ethan's future salary, Veronica's insistence on controlling every financial aspect of their relationship, the way her father, during the engagement party, had told me with an enigmatic smile, "Your struggle is over, Carol. Now it's our turn to take care of Ethan." It wasn't love. It was never love. It was a carefully orchestrated plan to use my son, to exploit everything he had worked so hard to achieve. Everything the two of us had achieved together. "How is Ethan?" was all I could ask, my voice barely recognizable to my own ears. There was a long pause, filled only by Susan's ragged breathing. "Devastated," she finally answered, "but also resolute. You should have seen him, Carol. When he confronted Veronica in front of everyone, he was different, like he had finally woken up from a long dream." When I hung up the phone, I sat motionless for several minutes, trying to process it all. The wedding that didn't happen, the betrayal, the financial scheme. And in the midst of it all, the one absence that should have shattered me my own ended up being the very thing that saved me from witnessing my son's public humiliation. Maybe, I thought with bitter irony, I should thank Veronica for pushing me away on this very day. The next few hours passed in a feverish blur. My phone didn't stop ringing, each new tone bringing more details about the disaster that had unfolded at the church. Guests leaving in a state of shock, Veronica's family trying to do damage control, spinning stories, blaming Ethan for leaving her at the altar. And at the center of the storm, my son, whom I still hadn't managed to speak to directly. Around 3 in the afternoon, a sharp knock on the door made me jump. I opened it to find Ethan standing there, still in his wedding suit, his tie undone, and his eyes red. Without a word, he stepped inside and wrapped me in a hug, so tight it nearly took my breath away. "Mom," he whispered into my hair. "Did you know?" I felt my heart clench. "Know what, honey?" "About Veronica. About who she really is." I pulled back gently, looking him in the eye. "I knew she didn't want me around. I knew she didn't respect me. But no, Ethan. I didn't know about the betrayal or about her family's financial plans." He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. "She told you not to come to the wedding, didn't she? That's why you weren't there." I couldn't lie to him. I never could. "Last night, she told me that after the wedding, I would no longer be a part of your family. She said it was better if I didn't even show up." End of chapter. His face darkened, a fresh wave of pain and rage passing over his features. "And you believed her? You believed that I would let that happen?" That question hit me like a lightning bolt. Had I, after all these years of raising him, after knowing his heart better than anyone, truly believed he would allow me to be pushed out of his life? The truth hurt. Yes, I had. Not because I didn't trust Ethan, but because I had seen the power Veronica held over him, the way he seemed blind when it came to her. "Ethan, she turned you into someone else when she was around. Someone I barely recognized sometimes." He sank onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. "I know," he mumbled through his fingers. I know. I sat down beside him, gently placing my hand on his shoulder. What happened at the church? I want to hear it from you. Ethan took a deep breath, as if gathering his strength. Matt, my best man. He received photos of Veronica with her boss, Stephen. Recent photos, from 2 weeks ago. They were, well, it was clear what was happening. He swallowed hard. Matt showed them to me minutes before the ceremony was supposed to start. At first, I didn't believe it. I thought it was some misunderstanding, or old photos from before we met. But they weren't. I finished softly. No. The date was right there, in the corner of the photos, and she was wearing the bracelet I gave her for our last anniversary. His voice cracked. I confronted her in the readying room. At first, she denied everything. Then she said it was just a mistake, a moment of weakness. But then her cousin, Chloe, who was drunk on champagne and nerves, let something slip about the prenup, about how Veronica's father had been celebrating the night before, that their financial problems would be solved after tomorrow. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the betrayal my son had endured. It wasn't just an affair. It was an elaborate trap, a web of lies woven by people who were supposed to love him. That's when I realized, Ethan continued, his voice gaining firmness, that it was never about me. It was about what I could provide. My future salary, my career, my contacts, all part of a plan. And what did you do? I asked, though I already knew the answer. A sad smile touched his lips. I walked to the altar, not to get married, but to announce to all the guests that the wedding was canceled, that Veronica had betrayed my trust, and that our relationship was over. Oh, I imagined the scene. My son, always so reserved and private, standing in front of 200 guests, laying his pain and disappointment bare. The courage that must have taken left me speechless. Her family went crazy, he went on. Veronica's father threatened me right there, in front of everyone, said I didn't know who I was messing with. Her mother started screaming that I was humiliating her daughter. And Veronica? He paused, the pain clear in his voice. Veronica completely transformed. All that charm, all that sweetness, it vanished. She called me a coward, said I was overreacting, that everyone cheats, that I was throwing away the best thing that ever happened to me. I took his hand in mine, squeezing it gently. I'm so sorry, honey. He squeezed my hand back, his eyes finding mine. You know what hurt the most? It wasn't the cheating. It wasn't even finding out about the financial scheme. It was realizing that she wanted to push you away from me, that she treated you like something disposable. His voice broke. You, who gave everything for me, who never once abandoned me. The tears I'd been holding back since he arrived finally spilled over. Oh, Ethan. And today, when you weren't there, at first I was furious. I thought you had abandoned me right when I needed you most. But now I understand. She forced you into it, made you believe it was what I wanted. I never should have believed her, I admitted, guilt consuming me. I should have been there for you, no matter what she said. Ethan shook his head firmly. No, Mom. Maybe it was better this way. You didn't have to witness that circus. And in a strange way, your absence made me see more clearly. When I realized that you, the most reliable, most constant person in my life, weren't there, it was like something clicked inside me. I started to question everything. And a long silence settled between us, filled only by the distant sound of birds in the garden and the occasional ring of my phone, which we now completely ignored. What happens now? I asked finally. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he'd made since he was a boy when thinking deeply. I'm not sure. I have to deal with the practical side, canceling the honeymoon, returning gifts, and I imagine her family won't give up easily. Veronica's father has connections and, from the sound of it, he's desperate for money. We'll face it together, I affirmed, feeling a new resolve build inside me. Whatever it is. Ethan smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen on his face in months. Together? He nodded, squeezing my hand. That night, as Ethan slept in the room I had kept untouched for him all these years, I sat on the back porch looking at the stars. The pain for what my son was going through was real and deep, but there was also, secretly, a small feeling of relief, as if we had narrowly escaped something much worse than a canceled wedding, years of manipulation, isolation, of financial and emotional abuse. What I didn't know then was that the story was far from over. In fact, the events of that day would be merely the prelude to an even greater battle. A battle that would test not only our resilience, but also our dignity, our truth, and even our financial future. The week following the non-wedding, as I started to call it in my mind, the storm I feared finally arrived. It began as whispers, small shock waves that spread through our relatively small community. Then, almost overnight, it morphed into a tsunami. Veronica's version of events began circulating on social media. A jilted bride, devastated by an insecure groom who caved to the manipulations of a possessive mother. She posted a picture of herself in her wedding dress, makeup artfully streaked, with the caption, "Some people don't know when to step back. Some mothers can't cut the umbilical cord." The comments flooded her page. Strangers offering support, friends demanding to know what kind of man leaves a woman at the altar, and what kind of mother interferes in her adult son's relationship. Her narrative was compelling, emotional, and completely fabricated. Ignore it. I advised Ethan when he showed me the posts, his face pale with rage. The people who matter know the truth. But we soon found out it wasn't that simple. Lies have long legs, as my grandmother used to say, and Veronica's were running a marathon. I started noticing strange looks at the grocery store, conversations that would stop abruptly when I approached at the pharmacy. An old friend from high school sent me a message asking if I had really ruined Ethan's wedding out of jealousy. Even the priest at our parish, who had known me since Ethan was a boy, called me in for a private chat about letting children follow their own paths. The indignation I felt was quickly replaced by something more painful: shame. Not because I believed the lies, but because after all those years of silent sacrifice, of dignity maintained in even the most difficult circumstances, I was being painted as the villain in someone else's story. Ethan, meanwhile, was facing his own battles. A partner at his law firm, who happened to be a friend of Veronica's father, began to question his judgment and emotional stability. Clients he had worked hard to secure were suddenly hesitant to work with him. Then, on a cloudy Thursday morning, about 10 days after the canceled wedding, the final bomb dropped. An official letter, delivered by a serious-faced courier, addressed to me. I opened the envelope with trembling hands to find a legal notice. Veronica's family was suing me for defamation, emotional damages, and, most absurdly, interference with contractual relations. I immediately called my friend Lauren, who worked as a paralegal at a large law firm downtown. She came straight to my house after her shift, her face grim as she read the document. "This is pure intimidation, Carol," she said finally, placing the papers on the kitchen table. "They're trying to scare you. This interference with contractual relations bit is just a fancy way of saying you ruined their financial plan." "Financial plan?" Lauren looked at me, surprised. "You didn't know? The Caldwells are practically bankrupt. Her father lost millions in bad investments over the last few years. They were counting on this wedding to stabilize their finances." That information landed like a stone in my stomach. So it had never been about love, not for a moment. It was about money, control, financial security. And when I refused to attend the wedding, a small act of self-preservation after years of submission, I gave Veronica the perfect opportunity to flip the narrative. She couldn't be seen as the unfaithful, opportunistic bride, so she painted me as the bitter, controlling mother who couldn't let her son go. It was brilliant, in a perverse way. The next day, Ethan received a similar letter. He came home pale, tossing the papers onto the table. "They're threatening to sue me too. Veronica's father said that if I don't publicly clear her name, he'll drag you through the courts. He said he'll ruin you financially." My heart hammered in my chest. Ethan was fresh out of law school, still paying off student loans, and his career was just beginning. A lawsuit, even a frivolous one, could drain him before he even had a chance to establish himself. "What are you going to do?" I asked, dreading the answer. Ethan clenched his fists, a fierce determination in his eyes that reminded me of the boy he once was. The boy who stood up to bullies twice his size to defend a classmate with a disability. "I'm going to fight, Mom. I'm going to fight for both of us." That night, as I lay awake, I remembered something Veronica had said months before, during one of her condescending moments. "You don't understand how the world works, Carol. Perception is everything. People believe what they see, not what's true. She was right about one thing. Perception mattered. People believed her because she played the part of the victim so well. If perception was her weapon, then we needed to fight back with the truth, not in whispers, not politely behind the scenes, but openly, publicly. And I had a feeling I had exactly the ammunition we needed. The next day, I tore through my small home office, finding every piece of evidence I had almost instinctively saved over the years. Emails Ethan had forwarded me, where Veronica talked about her financial expectations for their future. Photos of text messages he had shown me, where she questioned why he insisted on considering pro bono work when he could be making real money. And most importantly, a copy of the prenup Ethan had asked me to look over, with clauses so clearly predatory that any judge would see the intent behind them. When Ethan got home from work, I spread everything out on the living room table. "Look," I said, pointing to the papers. "We have our own weapon, the truth." And for he examined the documents, nodding slowly. "Yes, we have evidence. But how do we use it against them? If we go public, it will just look like retaliation, and it'll feed their narrative that we're vengeful and bitter." I considered his words. He was right. We needed to be strategic. "You're right. We can't just dump this on social media. We need professional help." It was Lauren who gave us the answer when we consulted her the next day. "I know an investigative reporter," she said. "Marcus Thorne. He specializes in exposing financial fraud and corporate schemes. If you have concrete evidence, he can turn this into a legitimate news story, not social media gossip." The idea was perfect. An investigative news report would carry a credibility our individual statements never could. And, more importantly, it would shift the focus of the narrative from family drama to financial fraud, where it truly belonged. Marcus met us at a discreet coffee shop downtown. A short man with a salt and pepper beard and piercing eyes that seemed to dissect every word we said. He listened to our story in silence, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. "What you have is strong," he said finally, "especially the prenup and the financial records of the Caldwell family. But I need more. I need independent confirmation." And peep. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus worked tirelessly, digging into the Caldwell family's financial history, interviewing former employees of their bankrupt companies, even getting an anonymous statement from a bank employee who dealt with their troubled accounts. Meanwhile, Veronica's campaign against us intensified. She gave a tearful interview to a local magazine detailing how I had poisoned Ethan against her for years, how I couldn't accept another woman in his life. Her family started making calls to Ethan's business contacts, implying he was emotionally unstable and unreliable for important legal matters. The pressure was almost unbearable. Ethan came home more exhausted each day, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights. I myself could barely leave the house without feeling the stares, the whispers, the silent judgment of neighbors I had known for decades. Then, exactly 1 month after the canceled wedding, Marcus's report was published. Behind the canceled wedding. The financial schemes of the Caldwell family. The story took up 2 full pages in the region's most respected newspaper, with an even more detailed online version. It was devastating in its clinical precision, detailing Mr. Caldwell's successive business failures, the unpaid loans, the previous accusations of fraud that had been quietly settled out of court. It included a legal analysis of the prenup, with independent lawyers labeling it predatory and ethically questionable. And yes, it mentioned the extramarital affair that had been the trigger for the wedding's cancellation, complete with blurry but recognizable photos of Veronica with her boss at a fancy restaurant, clearly in a romantic setting. The reaction was immediate. Online comments flooded in, not against me or Ethan, but against Veronica and her family. So she wanted his money, not his heart. That poor mother. Imagine being treated like that after raising your son alone. The Caldwells are gold diggers, pure and simple. The tide had turned. The truth, exposed to the light of day, was doing what our words alone never could. That night, Ethan and I sat on the back porch, drinking tea in silence. For the first time in weeks, there was no tension in the air, just a shared exhaustion and perhaps a small thread of hope. "Do you think it's over?" I asked finally. Ethan looked at the stars for a long moment before answering. I don't know. Her family is cornered now, and desperate people do desperate things. He turned to me, his eyes clearer than they had been in months. But at least now we're fighting with equal weapons, the truth against their lies. I nodded, understanding what he wasn't saying. The battle might not be over, but we now had a real chance to win. And most importantly, we had each other. The bond that Veronica had tried so hard to break was stronger than ever. What I didn't know then, as we sat peacefully on the porch that night, was that the Caldwells still had one last move planned. A move so audacious, so reckless, that no one could have foreseen it, and that would change our lives forever. The calm that followed the publication of Marcus's report was like the eye of a hurricane, a brief moment of peace before the next wave of chaos. For 2 weeks, Ethan and I breathed a little easier. The judgmental stares lessened. Messages of support started to trickle in. Even a few clients who had pulled away from Ethan's firm returned, admitting they had been misinformed about the situation. I should have been suspicious of the silence coming from the Caldwell family. People like them don't just quietly disappear when they're exposed. They retaliate, usually in ways you can never anticipate. The reprisal came on an ordinary Wednesday, while Ethan was in court on a case and I was grocery shopping. My cell phone rang. An unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something made me answer. Mrs. Carol Hayes? A formal, male voice asked. Yes, this is she. I'm Detective Riley with the city police. We need you to come down to the station as soon as possible to give a statement. My blood ran cold. A statement about what, exactly? There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. We have a formal complaint against you for extortion, blackmail, and making threats against the Caldwell family. The grocery bag slipped from my hands, oranges rolling down the supermarket aisle. That's absurd. I never— Mrs. Hayes, the detective interrupted, his voice now softer. I would strongly advise you to come accompanied by a lawyer. I left the groceries right there and drove home in a state of shock. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock the front door. Once inside, I immediately called Ethan, who rushed out of the courthouse as soon as he heard my trembling voice. By the time he got home, I had already found the document an officer had left at my door during my absence, an official summons detailing the accusations. According to the complaint, I had threatened the Caldwell family with public exposure of false information unless they paid a significant sum of money to keep me quiet. This is completely fabricated, Ethan said, his face red with rage as he read the document. They're trying to criminalize the fact that we exposed the truth about them. But how can they just invent accusations like that? Don't they need proof? Ethan ran a hand through his hair in frustration. To start an investigation? Not necessarily. And they've probably manufactured some kind of evidence. Fake emails, edited recordings, anything to give the accusation initial credibility. And now? My voice sounded small even to my own ears. Now, Ethan said with determination, we fight. And this time, it's not just for our reputation, but for your freedom. The next morning, we reported to the police station. Ethan had spent the entire night preparing our initial defense, while I sat beside him at the kitchen table, providing every detail I could remember about my interactions with the Caldwell family. The station was an old, imposing building downtown. As we walked up the front steps, I noticed a small group of reporters gathering. Someone had leaked the accusation to the press. Don't say anything, Ethan murmured, putting a protective arm around me as we hurried past the journalists. Not a single word. Detective Riley was a middle-aged man with tired eyes and an unreadable expression. He led us into a small interrogation room. It was a surreal experience for me, having never been on the wrong side of the law in my entire life. Mrs. Hayes, he began after switching on a recorder, are you aware of the accusations made against you? Yes, I replied, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. And they are completely false. Ethan interjected professionally. Detective, I'd like it on the record that my mother vehemently denies all allegations and that we are prepared to cooperate fully with the investigation, confident that the truth will prevail. The interrogation lasted for 2 agonizing hours. I was questioned about every interaction I ever had with Veronica and her family, about my motives for not attending the wedding, about what I really wanted by contributing to the news report that exposed the Caldwells. I answered every question truthfully, but as the questioning wore on, I noticed something unsettling in the detective's tone. It felt like he had already made up his mind, as if he were just going through the motions, not truly investigating. When we finally left, Ethan was tense. "He's not being impartial," he muttered as we walked to the car. "Someone got to him first." My stomach sank. "You think Veronica's family has connections in the police department?" "Maybe not directly," Ethan answered. "But her father has enough money and influence to open doors. And desperate people don't care about ethics." In the following days, the situation worsened. The story leaked to all the local papers, but in a distorted form. Mother accused of extorting son's ex-fiancé's family. My name and my picture were everywhere. The small boutique where I worked part-time called politely to say it might be best if I took a leave of absence until everything was resolved. Neighbors who had started greeting me again after Marcus's report now averted their eyes once more. The feeling of isolation was overwhelming. One night, sitting at the kitchen table going over documents with Ethan, I broke down in tears. "Maybe we should just give up," I whispered. "Maybe we should just say whatever they want to hear, publicly retract the story." Ethan put down the papers and took my hands. "Mom, look at me." His eyes were firm, resolute. "That's exactly what they want. To break us. To make us doubt the truth. To make you feel so cornered that you'd agree to any deal just to make this end." But what if they succeed? What if I get arrested for something I didn't do? "That's not going to happen," he stated with a conviction I desperately wanted to share. "We have the truth on our side, and now we have something else." "What?" A small smile appeared on his face. "Help. Marcus, the reporter, is furious about this attempt to criminalize the press. He's looking into Detective Riley, searching for connections to the Caldwells. And Lauren managed to get her boss, one of the top criminal lawyers in the city, to take our case pro bono." For the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. We weren't alone in this fight. The following week, the case took an unexpected turn. Marcus published a new report, this time focusing on the questionable investigation methods in the case against me. He had discovered that Detective Riley had a son who worked for one of the few surviving companies in Mr. Caldwell's crumbling empire. A clear conflict of interest that the detective had failed to mention. Simultaneously, our new lawyer, Mr. Wallace, filed a formal motion challenging the validity of the evidence presented against me, demanding it be submitted to forensic analysis to verify its authenticity. The pressure began to build no longer on us, but on the Caldwells and the system they had tried to manipulate. 3 days after Mr. Witchness and Windray's Amen Aftu, Wallace's motion, we received a call from him, his normally calm voice now charged with excitement. "The DA's office is considering dropping the case," he said. "It seems their evidence doesn't hold up to scrutiny, and they don't want the embarrassment of pursuing such an obviously fabricated charge." Ethan and I hugged, crying with relief. But our celebration was cut short by the rest of Mr. Wallace's information. "There's a condition, though. The Caldwells are proposing a deal. They'll drop the criminal complaints if you both sign a public retraction of Marcus's report and agree to a permanent non-disclosure agreement about the entire affair." I looked at Ethan, feeling the rage rise inside me. Even now, cornered, they were still trying to silence us, to force us to deny the truth. "No," I said firmly, surprising even myself with the strength of my conviction. "I will not lie to save their reputation. I will not recant the truth. I do." Ethan nodded, a proud smile lighting up his face. "Mr. Wallace, our answer is no. Tell them we're prepared to see this through to the end." It was a risky gambit. We were essentially daring a powerful, desperate family to do their worst. But something had changed inside me. The fear that had paralyzed me days earlier had been replaced by a steely resolve. I had spent my entire life ducking, adjusting, sacrificing my own dignity for the comfort of others. Not anymore. And then, when our defiance was relayed to the Caldwells, something extraordinary happened. They folded. 2 weeks later, the case was officially dropped due to insufficient evidence. Detective Riley was removed from his position, pending an internal investigation into the conflict of interest. And most surprisingly of all, Veronica and her family left town almost overnight, moving somewhere far away where their names and reputations weren't stained by the exposed truth. The storm had finally passed. But as we would discover in the months that followed, it had left both destruction and growth in its wake. It's strange how life marks you, how certain experiences imprint themselves on you, changing not just who you are, but how you see the world. In the months that followed the case being dropped, I discovered that truth firsthand. The immediate relief gave way to something more complex, a healing process that was both liberating and painful. Perhaps the hardest part was accepting that even with our public vindication, some wounds wouldn't fully close. Some neighbors remained distant. Certain friendships never quite recovered. Doubt, once planted, is a stubborn seed. Ethan faced his own challenges. Though his career at the law firm was finally moving forward without the shadow of the false accusations, the emotional trauma of Veronica's betrayal left him wary, reserved. He threw himself into work with an intensity that sometimes worried me, as if he could erase the memories through sheer effort. "You need to give yourself time," I would tell him gently on nights when I found him still bent over legal documents at 2 a.m, his eyes red with fatigue. "Pain doesn't go away just because you ignore it." "I'm fine, Mom," he would always reply, with that smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just busy with work." But there were moments of genuine growth between us, too. One evening, about 6 months after the whole ordeal, we were sitting on the porch, watching a summer thunderstorm roll in. The air was thick with the promise of rain, and distant lightning occasionally illuminated the dark sky. "You know what's strange?" Ethan said suddenly, breaking our comfortable silence. "I look back now, and I see all the red flags I ignored with Veronica. The way she talked about money, how she tried to push me away from people who actually cared about me, how she'd react when I mentioned pro bono cases. It's always easier to see the patterns in hindsight," I answered softly. "But it's not just that." He turned to me, his eyes serious in the dim porch light. "I wonder why I ignored those signs. Why I wanted to believe in her so much that I was willing to sacrifice the things and people that really mattered." It was a question I had asked myself countless times, but had never dared to voice. Why had my smart, sensitive son fallen so completely under the spell of someone like Veronica? "I think I was trying to fill something," he continued, the words coming slowly, as if he were discovering the truth as he spoke. "After Dad left, I always felt like there was something broken in me, something that made me not enough. And Veronica seemed so perfect, so complete. I thought that being with her would somehow complete me too. My heart ached. All those years, all those sacrifices to shield him from the pain of abandonment, and still, she had found a way in. Ethan, you were never not enough. Never. I know that now," he said, a small, genuine smile appearing on his face. "Ironically, thanks to Veronica. If she hadn't come in and turned our lives upside down, maybe I never would have confronted that fear. I never would have realized that I'm enough, exactly as I am." In that moment, as the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, I felt a kind of peace settle between us. An understanding that sometimes the most violent storms bring about the most necessary changes. For me, the change came more gradually, but just as profoundly. After decades of defining my identity almost exclusively through motherhood and sacrifice, I began to rediscover parts of myself that had long been forgotten. I started painting again, a passion I had abandoned when Ethan was a baby due to a lack of time and resources. I began with small watercolors. Then I moved on to larger canvases, letting the colors and shapes express what words sometimes couldn't. The first time Ethan saw one of my finished paintings, he just stood in the doorway of the small space I had converted into a makeshift studio, his eyes wide. "Mom, this is incredible. I had no idea you could paint like this." "And reason. There are a lot of things about me you don't know," I replied with a playful smile. It was true. There were parts of Carol, the woman not just Carol, the mother that were re-emerging after a long slumber. With Lauren's encouragement, I also began attending a support group for women who had been through trauma or major life transitions. At first, I went just to listen, intimidated by the idea of sharing my story with strangers. But over time, I found my voice. And more importantly, I found a community of women who understood what it meant to be tested to your limits and still remain standing. It was through that group that I met Grace, a psychologist who specialized in helping people rebuild their lives after abusive relationships. After hearing my story, she made a surprising proposal. "Carol, have you ever thought about using your experience to help others? We have a mentorship program for women going through similar situations, and I think you would be an extraordinary mentor." The idea that my pain could have a greater purpose, that it could be used to help others navigate their own storms, lit something inside of me. I began training with Grace, learning the skills needed to support others without becoming emotionally overwhelmed. 6 months after the case ended, I gave my first formal talk to a small group of women. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my notes, but when I began to speak, the words flowed naturally. "My name is Carol," I began, "and for most of my life I believed that to love meant to erase yourself, that to be strong meant to endure everything in silence. I'm here to tell you that I was wrong. The eyes of the women in the room, some with visible marks of their own suffering, others with more hidden wounds, were fixed on me, an instant connection forged through shared understanding. "Real strength isn't in how much suffering you can silently endure," I continued. "It's in knowing when to speak up, when to set boundaries, when to say, 'No, this is not acceptable.' And sometimes, real strength is in asking for help when you need it most." End of footnote. As I spoke, I realized I wasn't just helping these women. I was solidifying lessons I was still learning myself, that my dignity mattered just as much as anyone else's, that true love never demands you make yourself smaller, that even after 50, there was still time to discover new parts of myself. Ethan came to pick me up after the talk, waiting outside the room with a bouquet of sunflowers, my favorite. As I came out, surrounded by women who wanted to talk more, to share their own stories, I saw the pride in his eyes. "How did it go?" he asked, when I finally managed to say my goodbyes. "Transformative," I answered honestly, feeling a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. For them and for me. On the way home, we talked about the future, something that, at the height of the crisis with the Caldwells, had seemed like a luxury we might never have again. Ethan was considering starting his own law firm, focused on helping people who had been victims of financial fraud. I was thinking of going back to school, maybe taking a counseling course to supplement my mentorship work. "You know what's incredible, Mom?" Ethan said as we stopped at a red light. "A year ago, we were both just surviving. Now, we're actually living." His words perfectly captured the transformation we had undergone. The crisis that was meant to destroy us had instead forced us to grow in ways we never would have imagined. That night, sitting alone in my little makeshift studio, I started a new painting. It wasn't of the storm we had faced, but of the dawn that came after. Warm colors of hope and renewal, spreading across the horizon. As the brush glided across the canvas, I reflected on the journey that brought us here, on the cruel words whispered by Veronica, on the eve of the wedding that never was. "Starting tomorrow, you're just ancient history to this family." She was right, but not in the way she intended. The tomorrow she predicted never came. Instead, a different future unfolded, one she could never have anticipated, and one I had barely dared to dream of. A future where I wasn't just extra baggage in my son's life, but a woman rediscovering her own strength. Where the bond between Ethan and me, tested to its limit, emerged not just intact, but stronger and healthier than ever. A future where the scars we carried were not marks of shame, but medals of survival. And as the colors blended on the canvas before me, I felt a deep gratitude for this new dawn. Not just for what it was, but for the price we paid to reach it. A price that, as painful as it was worth every cent. A year has passed since I painted that first sunrise. The canvas now hangs in a prominent spot on my living room wall, a daily reminder of how darkness always gives way, eventually, to light. Time, that master of subtle transformations, has done its healing work. Not by erasing the scars, but by weaving them into the broader tapestry of our lives. Ethan has thrived in ways that fill my heart with a pride so deep I can sometimes barely articulate it. He did open his own law firm, small, but growing fast, specializing in helping victims of financial fraud and legal manipulation. The work fulfills him in a way his previous job never could. Seeing him use his own pain as fuel to help others reminds me daily of the extraordinary man he has become. Every case is different. he told me recently during one of our Sunday dinners, now a sacred tradition for us. But the pattern is always the same: vulnerable people being exploited by those who should be protecting them. I see you in every client, Mom, and I remember why I chose this path. As for me, my own journey has continued to unfold in surprising directions. The mentorship work expanded. I started giving regular talks at community centers, women's shelters, even a few local colleges. My message evolved beyond my own story to address broader issues: power dynamics in relationships, the signs of emotional manipulation, the importance of preserving your identity even in the closest partnerships. And yes, I completed that counseling course. At 53 years old, I became a student again, sitting among 20-somethings, soaking up knowledge with a thirst that only life experience can truly awaken. At first, I felt out of place, almost ashamed to be starting over so late. But I soon discovered that my unique perspective was valued by professors and younger colleagues alike. "You've lived what we're only just studying," a 22-year-old classmate told me after I shared some of my experience during a class discussion. It gives a whole different dimension to the learning. Painting has remained in my life, too, a private sanctuary for the days when words aren't enough. My little makeshift studio has expanded to take over the spare room that once held mostly memories and dusty boxes. The walls are now a kaleidoscope of colors and emotions captured on canvas. Some works are somber, exploring the darker corners of my journey. Others explode with light and possibility. 6 months ago, to my complete astonishment, a small local gallery offered to feature some of my pieces in a group show on art and healing. Opening night was surreal, watching strangers stand before my paintings, finding their own meanings in the colors and shapes I had poured from my soul. Ethan was by my side the entire evening, a constant, supportive presence. At one point, I noticed he had been quiet for several minutes, looking at one specific painting, one I had created during the bleakest days of our legal case. Deep blues and violets, with only a tiny pinprick of golden light on the distant horizon. "This is what it felt like, wasn't it?" he asked softly, not taking his eyes from the canvas. "Like we were drowning, with only a sliver of hope to hold on to." I nodded, amazed at his accurate perception. "Yes, that's exactly what it felt like." End quote. He turned to me then, his eyes shining with something that looked a lot like admiration. "You were always stronger than I realized, Mom. Stronger than you knew yourself." Those words have stayed with me, a balm for the moments when the old insecurities still try to resurface. As for the Caldwells and Veronica, they have all but vanished from our lives. We eventually heard, through mutual acquaintances, that they moved to another state. Occasionally, a mention of them will surface someone who ran into them on a business trip, or an old college friend who kept in touch with Veronica. Each time it happens, I feel a strange mix of emotions, a distant echo of the past pain, but also a kind of reluctant gratitude. It seems counterintuitive to feel anything but bitterness for people who tried so methodically to destroy us. But the truth is, without that devastating storm, we might never have discovered the depths of our own resilience. Maybe I would still be living on the sidelines of my own life, defining my worth solely through the role of a mother. Maybe Ethan would still be chasing a version of success that wouldn't truly fulfill him. No, I am not grateful to them. I could never be. But I am grateful for the woman I became by surviving them. About 2 months ago, something unexpected happened. Ethan showed up for our Sunday dinner with a guest, Camila, an environmental lawyer he met during a collaborative case. At first, I felt that old, familiar anxiety stir in my chest. The ghosts of Veronica loomed in the shadows of my mind, ready to remind me how easily I was dismissed before. But Camila was not Veronica. That was clear within the first 5 minutes of conversation. Where Veronica spoke about herself incessantly, Camila asked questions, genuinely interested in the answers. Where Veronica treated me with condescension, Camila treated me with a warm respect that felt neither forced nor calculated. At one point, as I was serving dessert, she noticed one of my smaller paintings hanging in the hallway. "This is just extraordinary," she said, walking closer to examine it. "The way you've captured that specific light? Did you study formally?" "Not really," I answered, a little flustered by the attention. "It's more of a hobby I picked up again recently." End of pros. Well, "You have a genuine gift," she said, and something in the unpretentious sincerity of her tone moved me deeply. "My mother is a curator at a gallery in Chicago. She would love to see your work." After Camila left, Ethan and I did the dishes side by side, a comfortable silence between us, until he finally spoke. "So, what did you think of her?" he asked, trying to sound casual but unable to completely hide the weight of my answer. I considered carefully before responding. "She seems real, present, the kind of person who actually sees other people." Ethan let out a breath I didn't realize he'd been holding. "Yeah, that's exactly how I feel too." "Are you too serious?" I asked, trying not to push too hard. "We're taking it slow," he answered, a small smile playing on his lips. "We both have our own complicated relationship histories. But yes, I think this could be something special." "How?" I felt a lump form in my throat, a mixture of hope and that residual fear that may never fully disappear. Ethan must have seen something on my face because he put down the plate he was drying and held my wet hands in his. "Mom, I learned my lesson, the hardest way possible. I learned to see the red flags, to value substance over appearance, to never again let someone separate me from the people who truly love me." His eyes met mine, steady and clear. "And that includes you. It will always include you." That evening, after Ethan left, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, looking at the stars. I thought about the young mother I once was, holding a small boy who was asking when his dad was coming home. I thought of all the sleepless nights spent worrying if I was doing enough, giving enough, being enough. If I could go back in time and speak to that younger version of myself, what would I say? Maybe that the sacrifices would be worth it, but that she shouldn't lose herself completely in them. That one day, her son would be an extraordinary man, not despite the hardships they faced, but partly because of them. That there would be pain, yes, so much pain, but also moments of joy so pure they would make it all worthwhile. And maybe, most importantly, I would tell her that the story doesn't end with, and they lived happily ever after. It ends with, and they kept on living, growing, learning, sometimes stumbling, but always moving forward stronger together than they could ever be apart. Last week, I received an unexpected invitation. A nonprofit organization that works with women transitioning out of abusive relationships asked me to be the keynote speaker at their annual fundraising event. The irony was not lost on me. I, who once felt so small, so easily discardable, now being asked to share my wisdom with hundreds. I accepted, of course. And as I was working on my speech last night, I found myself coming back to those words whispered so cruelly on the eve of the wedding that never was. "Starting tomorrow, you're just ancient history to this family." Veronica was wrong, but not in the way I initially imagined. I am not ancient history. I am a living story, still unfolding in chapters that no one, least of all me, could have ever predicted. Looking at the future now, at 54, I see possibilities where I once saw only limitations. I see a son flourishing on his chosen path, perhaps building a new love founded on mutual respect and genuine admiration. I see my own work touching lives in ways I never imagined I was capable of. I see new sunrises waiting to be painted, stories waiting to be told, wounds waiting to be transformed into wisdom. And if anyone asks me how I survived the storm that nearly destroyed us, I will say this. When cruel words try to define you, when malicious hands try to shape you into something small and disposable, remember who you truly are, not just a mother, or a son, or any other singular role the world tries to shrink you into. You are a universe of possibilities. You are a story yet to be written. You are bigger than any definition others try to impose upon you. And when someone tries to convince you otherwise, when they whisper that starting tomorrow you are no longer part of the family, that your value has been used up, that your place at the table no longer exists, remember this. True belonging never depends on someone else's permission. True family is not defined by prenups or financial interests. And your story? Well, your story belongs only to you. It was that truth that saved Ethan and me in our darkest hour. It was that truth that allowed us to emerge not just as survivors, but as transformed. And it is that truth I carry with me now, a beacon to light not just my own path, but perhaps the paths of others who are still struggling to find their light. Today, when I look in the mirror, I no longer see just the exhausted single mother who sacrificed everything, nor the woman dismissed with cruel words whispered on a summer night. I see Carol whole, complex, still evolving. A woman who, after spending most of her life taking care of others, finally learned how to take care of herself, too. And that, perhaps, is the sweetest victory of all. Now, if you liked this story, click on this next video that appears on the screen, because in it is a story of betrayal and upheaval like you've never seen before.